Hello, I'm glad that you're here. Well, the West Coast trip had to come to a close at some point, and for the final stretch, my dad had met me out in Vegas so we could do a little bit of exploring at his favorite parks. So we woke up ungodly early and began on our trek to... We decided to start our trip with a hike on Angel's Landing, basically a walk along a thin ridgeline that sits 1,500 feet above the canyon floor. And for some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to lug my giant medium format camera up with me along with my 35mm. So with the cameras loaded, we hopped on the park shuttle and started towards the grotto trailhead. It was a really great day for a hike. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky, which suited the Fuji Acros I had in the Pentax rather nicely. But unfortunately, it made the color film I had in the Mamiya just look a little flat. It wouldn't be a video with me if the first shot wasn't terribly light leaked. I only took one medium format shot on the way up because in the time it took me to set it up, my dad had got this far ahead of me. And with a hike this steep, you do not want to be running to catch up.
That's a pretty good drop. Oh man. We still got all that to go.
These switchbacks were intense, but after about a half hour, we had made it through Refrigerator Canyon and were at the home stretch of Walter's Wiggles.
You okay?
After blowing out our calves, we had finally made it to Scout's Lookout. And that was when I got my first real view of what we had gotten ourselves into.
You ready to do it?
One fun little tidbit about my time doing this trail is I had to do it barefoot. My shoes slipped out from under me 3 times just on the walk to the base of Angel's Landing alone, so there was no way I was going to risk that when I was leaning over a 1,000-foot drop.
So, I'm not gonna lie, this is kinda terrifying.
Look, I know I sound like a wimp here, but I'm not Alex Honnold, so this was still slightly out of my comfort zone. Eventually we got to a point where there was space to set up the camera, so I tried to get a landscape of the canyon. It's not that special of a picture, but man was it a hell of a hike to get it. This was also the point where my dad elected to stop and cheer me on as I climbed my way to the top. He really isn't much for heights, so it was cool he made it as far as he did. This section of the trail was actually super interesting because to mitigate the fear, you just get into a moment of pure focus where all that exists is the next step you're taking, which also meant I forgot to film a lot of the climb. Look, I was already doing it barefoot, I didn't need to also do it one-handed. So instead we'll smash cut to me at the top. And unfortunately, these pictures are really nothing to talk about. I wish I had summited at either sunrise or sunset, because these would be some spectacular shots with some dynamic lighting. But the sun could not be more dead center in the sky, so these will have to do. Luckily, the black and white shot turned out pretty decent though. I felt a lot more confident on the down climb, so I got a little more footage showcasing the drops.
Here comes Russell, victorious. Hey, Russell.
Finally, I met back up with my dad and we began the hike down to the canyon floor. As the sun began to sink, Refrigerator Canyon had some gorgeous lighting, prompting me to take this, which I really like. It almost feels like an impressionist painting, and this is one of the compositions that looks good in color and black and white. The hike to the bottom was a lot faster than the hike to the top, so as the sun was beginning to set, we made our way out of Zion to our Airbnb.
Yeah, something to flatten it down.
which just so happened to be the coolest place I've ever stayed in. What can be better than a covered wagon in the high desert surrounded by gorgeous rock formations and also just a really cute dog that roams the place? Also, they set up a nice birthday surprise for my dad. Point is, I loved this place, and sitting by a fire as the sun sets over the desert is one of the best feelings in the world. But it was time to go to bed so we could be up early for our drive the next day.
Guys, look, there's a dog. And he's so cute. Did you get any waters out of that? No.
Did I mention one of the other great parts about the Airbnb was it was equidistant from Zion and Bryce Canyon? So the next morning it was just a short trip to the park entrance. Now, Bryce Canyon sits about 3,500 feet higher than Zion, which meant it was certainly a lot colder. And considering what happened the last time I took the Pentax out in the cold in Sequoia, I thought it'd be best just to bring the Mamiya along with me. We started off at Inspiration Point, which was really beautiful but also really windy and very cold. I'd say this is probably the best spot to get an overview of what Bryce Canyon is like, so I took the opportunity to set up a few shots. I think Portra did a much nicer job of showcasing the color of the rocks in this place. And as much as I hated the cold in the moment, I think the snow added a nice texture to the environment. But eventually the cold got too unbearable in the higher sections, so we made our way to Sunset Point to begin hiking our way into the canyon itself. This was a pretty nice walk. The canyon is just a vast network of trails, so whatever our original plan was got totally tossed out the window as we set out on the wrong path pretty much immediately. But either way, it was super nice to walk along the hoodoos and all the other interesting formations Bryce had to offer. And I'm pretty satisfied with some of these pictures. I think the colors of the rocks contrasted nicely to the blue sky, and the formations helped with some nice framing. Ultimately, we didn't stay very long at Bryce. I think the consistent 2 weeks of traveling and hiking was getting to me, so even though I wanted to go for a longer trip through the canyon, I knew it wouldn't be very enjoyable. So instead, we made our way back out at Sunrise Point and decided to take the long road home through Zion's other entrance. This could not have worked out more nicely. For once throughout this entire trip, we actually arrived at our destination when the lighting was rather good, and shortly after pulling into the park, we stopped to check out a dried up riverbed, which still had preserved some incredible fall colors. And then it was on to Zion's mile-long tunnel.
See, I told you this one.
Wow, you can't even see the other side.
And 10 minutes of darkness later, we were on a side of Zion that was just breathtaking. So naturally, I bugged my dad to pull over a lot. It's incredible the difference some lighting can make. These are some of my favorite shots I took on this stretch of the trip, just because I think the content mixed with the dramatic lighting just showcases the grandeur of Zion. But the timing wasn't the only reason we went back to the park. We hatched a plan to hike the Narrows the next day, and we lacked every bit of equipment necessary to do it. So we also needed to scout out some outfitter rentals. And not only did we find an outfitter, we found this beauty. A real-life, genuine pub right outside Zion's gates. So after I made my dad do an awkward cheers video for a stupid f***ing internet video, we walked out to a gorgeous sunset and went back to rest up for the big day. The next morning was rather bittersweet. It was time to say goodbye to the wagon, and it was also the last real day of the trip. So after saying my farewells to all of the random animals they had on the property,
Hey there, big fella. Oh, you're big.
we started off towards Zion one last time. Now, you may be asking, what's with the waterproof boots? Well, if you aren't familiar with the Narrows, it's not so much a trail as it is a very brisk 10-mile walk in a freezing river with canyon walls on either side of you. Now, I thought Angel's Landing was cool, but this is easily one of the coolest hikes I've done in my life. The best part about being in a canyon is the lighting is pretty interesting all day long. My only regret was I didn't include more people in some of these shots. I thought it'd be cool to get the natural stuff, and sometimes I'd sit around for 20 minutes waiting for people to get out of frame. But looking back, I'm finding I enjoy the ones with people in them a lot more. They provide a much better sense of scale and also add to the exploratory atmosphere of the day. So there was a little bit of fighting against the clock. The last shuttle out of the canyon left at 6 p.m., and considering we did not get the earliest of starts, we had about 3 hours to make it to Big Spring, which marks the turnaround, and get ourselves out of the canyon. All the stopping I was doing with the camera was not particularly helpful, and my dad had decided to play it safe and turn around a little bit early so there was plenty of daylight and time left for him to make it back. But I was dead set on making it to Big Spring, so I packed that camera up and swore I wouldn't take it out until I reached the end. The rest of the hike actually felt a little ominous because just about everyone had turned around at that point, and there was flash flood debris everywhere that you had to climb over. But eventually I had finally reached Big Spring. And it managed to be way cooler than I imagined.
It's so cool, it's just all this water bubbling up from the ground. That's incredible.
I don't know if I've ever seen a spring like this in my life, but unfortunately I had to hurry up, take my pictures, and leave so I wouldn't be stranded at the back end of the park. And here it is, the final film picture of the West Coast trip. And luckily it didn't suck too much. With the rolls finished off, all I had to do was make it out of the canyon as fast as I could, but of course it couldn't just be that easy.
There is an elk down here with me, with big old horns, and boy golly do I not want to f it. So that's gonna slow my pace down a lot. He knows I am here, and I know he's here. Hopefully this doesn't end poorly. See, man, we're cool. We're cool. There's no problem here.
The good news is I made it out on time, but I didn't film it because I was rushing and also I was too tired to think. But that's it. That's the West Coast series all wrapped up. Starting from a business trip out in LA and ending with one of the coolest hikes I've ever done in Utah. As we were driving back to Vegas to fly out the next morning, all I could think was this was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. I think it's very easy to sit at home and stay comfortable with what's around you. Hell, that's mostly what I've done since I've been back while editing all these videos. But there really is something so gratifying about going out and seeing something you never have before. And the process of documenting it almost made it more special in a way. I'm excited to look back on this series in a couple of years and kind of fill in the gaps in my memory. Sure, I've gone out and photographed things I was familiar with before, but I consider this my first true photography adventure, and I'm hoping I can have many more in the future. Thanks to Blake for joining me on the hectic first half, and thanks to my dad for showing me some of his favorite national parks. And also, thank you to everyone that's watched along. I hope you've enjoyed the series as much as I've enjoyed making it. And now to ruin the sappy bit, let me know if you had a favorite part in the series. I know I had my favorite moments, but I'm curious what parts stuck out for other people. Also, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more film photography content. Anyway, that's about it. With when this is coming out, I hope you have some happy holidays, and until next time.